Kofi, a ranger in Serengeti National Park, wiped the sweat from his forehead, even though the sun had only just risen above the horizon. The relentless heat of the African continent showed no mercy, even in the early hours. His morning patrol was a routine he had carried out for over 15 years. During that time, he had seen everything, from the birth of new life to the tragic consequences of poaching. But Kofi had no idea that today would become one of the most important days of his life. The ranger moved along the park's border, where wildlife sometimes came dangerously close to human settlements. These areas always required special attention. Too often, conflicts between animals and people happened here. Suddenly, something moved in the bushes near the small village of Mbili. Kofi's blood ran cold as he spotted the unmistakable shape of a large predator. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, immediately imagining the worst. A lion near the settlement meant great danger for the local residents. In such cases, the animal usually had to be tranquilized and relocated back to the park. Sometimes, if the lion had already attacked people or livestock, the decision could be even more serious. Kofi slowly approached, careful not to make any sudden moves. He was an experienced ranger and knew how to handle predators, but he could still feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins. However, the closer he got, the clearer it became that something was wrong with this lion. The majestic predator, which should have been a symbol of strength and power, could barely stand. Its once muscular body had turned into a skeleton covered with skin. Its mane, which should have been thick and full, hung in dirty, tangled clumps. But what struck Kofi the most were the lion's eyes, not filled with rage or aggression, but with exhaustion and pain. "What happened to you, my friend?" Kofi asked softly, even though he knew he wouldn't get an answer. The lion showed no signs of aggression. It looked like it was about to collapse. Its legs wobbled, its body swayed, and its eyes kept closing from sheer exhaustion. Kofi made a decision that went against all safety protocols but felt right in his heart. He had some meat in his vehicle for baiting traps. He decided to feed the lion. Moving slowly without taking his eyes off the predator, Kofi returned to his jeep and took out a large piece of fresh meat. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it might jump out of his chest. 15 years in the reserve had taught him to respect wild animals, especially big cats. Even a weakened lion was still one of Africa's most dangerous predators. Kofi took a deep breath to steady himself. He felt he was doing the right thing, though a voice in his head kept reminding him of colleagues who had been injured in similar encounters. Returning, he carefully placed the meat on the ground a few yards from the lion and stepped back. At first, the animal didn't move, as if it didn't trust the unexpected gift. Its amber eyes shifted from the meat to Kofi, as if evaluating the situation and weighing its chances. Weakness was clearly fighting against its survival instinct. Then, slowly overcoming its exhaustion, the lion approached the meat and began to eat. It ate greedily, but without the strength lions usually show when feeding. Every movement of its jaws seemed to drain its last bits of energy. While the lion was focused on eating, Kofi moved closer to get a better look at its condition. What he saw made his heart clench with both pity and anger. The lion's entire body was covered in parasites. Giant African ticks, the size of a thumbnail, had latched onto its skin, especially around its neck and belly. These ticks not only sucked the animal's blood, but also carried a deadly disease, theileriosis, which caused severe anemia and extreme exhaustion in big cats. Every inch of the lion's body seemed to be a battlefield, and the king of beasts was losing. Kofi saw how some of the ticks, engorged with blood, had turned a swollen grayish blue. He even noticed areas where the lion's skin was inflamed and reddened around clusters of parasites, a clear sign of infection. The ranger suppressed a wave of nausea as he imagined the pain the animal must have been feeling. In his work, he had seen many things, but such a massive parasite infestation was rare, even for an experienced field worker. But what Kofi saw on the lion's side was even more terrifying. In a wound where there was clearly an open injury, white worm-like creatures were wriggling, screwworm fly larvae. These parasites lay their eggs in open wounds, and once the larvae hatch, they feed on living flesh, deepening the wound and causing excruciating pain. Now it was clear why the lion was in such a horrible condition. It was literally being eaten alive, both inside and out. Kofi could see the individual segments on the larvae's bodies, their almost transparent skin and the darkened insides, a clear sign that they had recently fed on the lion's flesh. Some larvae were already the size of a human pinky finger, their bodies twisting inside the wound, making it worse with every movement. The horrifying sight filled Kofi with overwhelming pity for the great beast, reduced to a helpless state by tiny yet relentless enemies. "Oh God," Kofi whispered, pulling out his phone. "I understand why you left your pride. You couldn't hunt anymore, right? They couldn't wait for you to recover." For lions, especially males, the inability to hunt often means exile from the pride. A weakened animal becomes a burden rather than a protector and provider. Kofi knew that if not for this chance encounter, the lion would have faced an inevitable death, either from starvation or from predators that wouldn't miss the opportunity to attack a weakened king of beasts. Wasting no time, Kofi contacted the park's veterinary service. His voice trembled with urgency as he described the situation. Fortunately, the mobile veterinary team was relatively close and promised to arrive within an hour. During the entire wait, Kofi stayed near the lion. After finishing the meat, the animal lay down, as if it had spent the last of its energy. The waiting felt like an eternity, and Kofi never took his eyes off the suffering creature. Every breath the lion took was heavy. Every movement was a struggle. Several times, Kofi feared that the lion had stopped breathing, and he stepped closer, risking his own safety, to make sure the animal was still alive. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became unbearable. Kofi found a bottle of water in his vehicle and a small bowl he always carried just in case. Carefully, he poured some water into the bowl and placed it near the lion's head. At first, the animal didn't react, but the scent of water must have awakened its thirst. With great effort, the lion lifted its head and began to lap up the water, slowly with long pauses, but still drinking. It was a good sign. Finally, in the distance, Kofi spotted a familiar van with the emblem of the park's veterinary service. He let out a breath of relief. The waiting was over, and now the lion had a real chance of survival. The team worked quickly and professionally. The lion was carefully sedated with a tranquilizer dart, after which the veterinarians began their examination. Dr. Fumi, the head veterinarian, confirmed Kofi's initial observations with a grim expression. The lion's condition was critical: severe malnutrition, dehydration, anemia caused by blood-sucking parasites, and a massive infection in its wounds from the fly larvae. Fumi immediately got to work, methodically removing the ticks with special tweezers and placing them in a container for further study. Her movements were precise and confident, the result of years of experience. From time to time, she muttered curses in Yoruba, her native language, whenever she found particularly large clusters of parasites. Two assistants helped her. One held an IV with saline solution, while the other handed her tools and medication. "Kofi, look!" Fumi pointed to an area behind the lion's shoulder. "This is a bullet wound." Kofi leaned in and saw the unmistakable mark, a hole, partially covered with dried blood and pus. Now the whole picture became clear to him. The lion had been shot by poachers, but had somehow managed to escape. However, the wound became a perfect breeding ground for parasites, and combined with blood loss and the inability to hunt properly, it had led to the predator's disastrous condition. Fumi carefully examined the area around the wound, assessing the depth of the injury and checking whether the bullet was still inside. She used a portable ultrasound device, moving the probe over the lion's body and studying the image on the screen. Her face grew more and more concerned as she examined the scan. Cursing under her breath, she showed Kofi the screen, where a metallic object was clearly visible, lodged between the muscles and dangerously close to the bone. The bullet was still inside. "Damn poachers," Kofi hissed, clenching his fists. "When will this finally end?" "We'll do everything we can," Fumi replied, as she prepared the tools to remove the bullet and treat the wound. "But he'll need serious rehabilitation. Let's hope he's a fighter." The operation to remove the bullet lasted nearly an hour. Fumi worked methodically and carefully, trying to minimize further tissue damage. Finally, with a metallic clang, the bullet dropped into a metal tray. It was a large caliber bullet, clearly from a poacher's rifle. Kofi took a picture of it. Perhaps it would help in the investigation and lead to the capture of the criminals. The lion was transported to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center located within the park. The following weeks turned into an anxious waiting period for Kofi. He visited the lion, whom the center staff had named Zuberi, almost every day after his shifts. Slowly, the animal began to recover. The veterinarians had successfully removed the bullet, thoroughly cleaned all wounds of parasites, and started treatment with antibiotics and antiparasitic medication. The first few days at the center were the most critical. Zuberi was so weak that he barely moved, lying on a soft bedding inside a special enclosure. Kofi would sit by his side for hours, speaking to him in a quiet voice and telling stories from his life in the savannah. The center's staff smiled at this unusual bond between a man and a wild beast, but no one interfered. They all understood that this was part of the healing process. On the third day, Zuberi ate meat on his own for the first time, a small but crucial victory. By the fifth day, he could stand and take a few steps inside the enclosure, though it was clearly difficult for him. After 2 weeks, the veterinarians noted a significant improvement in his blood work, and most of his wounds had begun to heal. His body was slowly clearing out the toxins that had built up during his illness. Kofi brought fresh meat for Zuberi from a local farm, the best cuts he could find. Over time, a strange bond formed between them, built on mutual trust. The lion recognized the ranger's scent and voice, meeting him at the enclosure's fence. Sometimes Kofi thought he saw gratitude in Zuberi's eyes, though he knew it was likely just his own emotions reflecting back at him. Zuberi proved to be a true fighter. Although specialists had initially been cautious with their predictions, the lion grew stronger with each passing day. His body gradually regained its strength, his wounds healed, and the fire in his eyes returned. The unmistakable spirit of these majestic predators. Kofi often sat by the enclosure, simply watching him, and the lion seemed to recognize him. After 3 months of rehabilitation, Zuberi was unrecognizable. The majestic predator no longer resembled the emaciated, parasite-ridden creature Kofi had found near the village. His muscles had rebuilt, his mane had grown back thick and shiny, and his gaze had become confident and commanding. He was no longer a patient. He was once again a lion, a powerful hunter meant for the wild. Nearly 6 months passed before the veterinarians decided that Zuberi was ready to return to the wild. During this time, he had fully regained his weight, his muscles had strengthened, and his mane had become lush and regal once more. The day Kofi had both anticipated and feared finally arrived, the day to set Zuberi free. The night before the release, Kofi spent several hours by Zuberi's enclosure. He sat in a folding chair, sipping coffee from his thermos, watching the lion, who seemed to sense the upcoming change. Zuberi was restless, often getting up and pacing along the fence, sniffing the wind carrying the scents of the savannah. His instincts were awakening again, the call of the wild growing stronger. "Tomorrow you'll be free, my friend," Kofi said softly. "I hope you're ready." The release location was carefully chosen, an area where a small pride without a dominant male had recently been observed, an ideal place for a strong lion ready to establish his own family. Kofi was part of the team transporting Zuberi to the release site. The journey was tense. Zuberi, inside a special transport cage, growled and thrashed against the walls, sensing his impending freedom. The team remained silent, understanding the importance of the moment. They crossed several streams and traveled through vast plains covered in tall grass before reaching the selected site, a small wooded grove on the edge of the open savanna. When the cage was opened, Zuberi didn't rush out like most animals would. Instead, he stepped out slowly, looked around, and then turned to stare directly at Kofi. In that gaze, the ranger thought he saw gratitude, a fleeting recognition of the unusual bond that had formed between them. Then the magnificent beast turned and calmly walked into the savannah, gradually disappearing into the tall grass. "Good luck, Zuberi," Kofi said softly, feeling a strange mix of pride and sadness. A year passed. Kofi continued his work as a ranger, but he often thought about Zuberi, wondering how his life had turned out. In the first few months after the release, he deliberately drove through the area where they had set the lion free, hoping to catch a glimpse of him or at least find signs of his presence. Several times, locals reported seeing a large lion with a distinctive scar on his shoulder, but Kofi himself never managed to spot him. He asked other rangers and researchers working in that part of the reserve. Some had seen a lion matching Zuberi's description, but no one could say for certain if it was him. Kofi carefully documented every sighting, marking locations on a map and gradually tracking what seemed to be Zuberi's movements. One day, a colleague told him he had seen a large lion with a scar alongside two young lionesses, the first sign that Zuberi might have started forming his own pride. This news made Kofi happier than he expected. It meant his efforts hadn't been in vain and that the rescued lion had truly returned to a full life in the wild. Then one day, during a routine patrol, Kofi spotted a small pride of lions resting in the shade of an acacia tree. He stopped his vehicle at a safe distance and lifted his binoculars. His heart nearly jumped out of his chest when he recognized the familiar mane and the scar behind the left shoulder. It was Zuberi, but he was no longer alone. Beside him lay two lionesses, and lion cubs played around them. Three little cubs, no more than 3 months old, tumbled over each other under the watchful eyes of their mothers. Kofi could hardly believe his eyes. Zuberi hadn't just survived, he had thrived. He had built his own pride and become a father. It was the ultimate proof that their efforts to save him had been a success. As if sensing he was being watched, Zuberi lifted his head and looked toward the jeep. Slowly, he got up and, to Kofi's surprise, began walking toward him. The ranger froze, unsure of what to expect. The lion stopped about 50 feet away from the vehicle, looking directly at Kofi. There was no aggression in Zuberi's eyes, no fear, just silent recognition of the man who had saved his life. They stood there staring at each other, Kofi and Zuberi, their fates forever intertwined by a single chance encounter. Then one of the cubs, the boldest of the three, ran up to his father and playfully pounced on his tail. Zuberi gave Kofi one last look, a gaze that held gratitude and something that felt like a farewell, before turning back to his family. Kofi sat in his jeep for a long time, unable to suppress both a smile and tears at the same time. This was one of those rare moments that made all the hardships and dangers of his profession worth it. A moment when he realized that his actions had mattered, that he had truly made a difference in the world. As he finally started the vehicle and drove off to continue his patrol, he knew that Zuberi's story would be one he would tell young rangers, to show them why their work was so important. In a world where bad news about wildlife was all too common, about poaching, habitat destruction, and species disappearing, the story of one lion's survival, of a king who had reclaimed his throne, was a beacon of hope, a reminder that even one person, with enough compassion and determination, could change the course of fate. And deep in the savannah, Zuberi, the king of his small pride, watched over his territory, teaching his cubs everything a lion needed to know. On the neck of one of the cubs, a dark marking had begun to form, strikingly similar to the bullet scar his father bore. But for the young lion, it was merely a unique birthmark, not a reminder of pain and suffering. A new generation was beginning its life without the scars of the past, and that was the greatest victory of all.